Welcome back. All right, so as you can see, Christmas tree's still behind me here. It is that time of year, and yet, if you're Canadian, you're still dealing with the Canada Post being on strike storyline. And it's interesting because reports are about 40% of Canadians are heavily interested in what's going on with this strike. Another 40% that are somewhat interested, and 20%, I guess, that just don't overly care. Then you have to factor in how many people actually answer polls. That's one question I always have in the back of my mind, like, who's answering polls anymore? Who's actually doing these? Anyways, the strike's past 3 weeks. In fact, it's going to be a month on the 14th. And there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And I really do wonder, like, so you've got a corporation that has been losing money, which the union doesn't believe. Because anytime that you talk about the union, the corporation losing money, the answer that I get is, oh, but they've got all these executives making all this money and they've got all these offices. And okay, but it doesn't mean they're not running out of money. It just means they're spending money they probably don't have to spend, or they probably shouldn't be spending. It does not mean that the company's not in any kind of trouble. So Purolator, FedEx, other couriers in Canada are overwhelmed with the packages that they're receiving. Purolator, almost everything I think in their system showed a missed connection. So I have a package I've been waiting for that was due last week that's still not here. I think it's going to be here today through Purolator. And then I have one through FedEx, which is also delayed because of the ongoing strike. And the interesting part is shipping with those couriers is more expensive in Canada than shipping with Canada Post. And this is something that is the grim reality here, that Canada Post is popular with Canadians in part because they charge a lot less for shipping, and they're losing money in part, I think, because they're charging a lot less for shipping. And you've got a union that wants more money. They're not offering enough money. We know how these strikes work. It's very similar. And online sellers, there's some online sellers talking about how they could go out of business. This is their busy time of year, and that busy time of year has been taken from them. I've had packages that I've ordered that I've got messages from the seller saying, I only ship through Canada Post, so I can't ship this until the strike is done. So I'm sure I'm not the only one that's had that message, and it's inconveniencing people. The interesting part is that there was another poll, and who knows who's answering these, that showed that young people are being impacted more than older people. You would think it's people over 65 who are desperately waiting for packages. Apparently, it's only 14% of those over 65 who've been impacted, and it's around a quarter of people between 18 and 34 who've been negatively impacted that they're waiting for something. And it makes sense because those are your consumers. They're more likely to be buying parcels and that kind of thing. So that makes some sense. Now, where this is at is really kind of nowhere. That they just keep submitting proposals back and forth. At this point, the ball has been lobbed into the court of the union. The union's looking through the proposal that Canada Post gave them on Friday, and it just doesn't feel like there's urgency. Like it doesn't feel like there's urgency from the union or from the corporation to end this, while the busiest time of year just passes right by. And you get into January, which is not a busy time for people sending packages, especially once Boxing Day's done and all the returns are already done. So, in the federal mediation, which is supposed to help with this, well, that quit 2 weeks ago. Federal mediator was like, these guys aren't even speaking the same language. I can't mediate something when people aren't even agreeing on the framework of how this is going to look. So they haven't come back to the table. There's been no straight face-to-face discussions I've seen in a while, and it just doesn't feel like either side is doing a lot to make this get resolved. So one thing to keep in mind is public support. And the public support in general seems to be towards the Canada Post side. And as with anything else, it's ideologies too, and which parties you support are going to determine probably which side you support. But it's 34% of Canadians that are supporting Canada Post, 29% supporting the union, and 23% supporting neither. And I'm guessing any percentage not in there just doesn't care and just doesn't really have an opinion on it. So the union's not winning the PR battle here, and it is difficult because I mean, the press are going to get their statements from Canada Post, and they're going to present that side, and maybe the union's not being as articulate. And it also could be that the union's asking for more money at a time where a lot of Canadians are like, yeah, we'd love to have more money. And so they may not get the sympathy from people that they might otherwise get, right? So calls for the federal government to step in have fallen apart. Now, there was a port strike in Canada during this calendar year, which got ended pretty darn quickly. The federal government stepped in because a port strike means no goods are moving in the ports, and they couldn't have that, so they had to step in, and they had to make sure that that got dealt with and fixed. And some people are expecting that to happen with Canada Post, but it's not considered to be as vital as it used to be. We used to see federal back to work legislation pretty quickly after they went on strike. That's why I never really was concerned when Canada Post went on strike in previous instances, because I thought, well, the federal government will step in soon enough and they'll put an end to it, something along those lines, which probably doesn't benefit the union at all or the corporation necessarily. In that way, probably each side get a deal they don't like. But to this point, it's been mostly ignored or met with a no. That the federal government's like, nah, we got our own problems. And it's considered more of a consumer problem now rather than an actual, this is an important part of the Canadian ecosystem storyline. So, one thing that I said in a video that did get people talking is the idea that we could be looking at a future where Canada Post is no longer a crown corporation, where it could be run like a business. And that could be where it ends up. And I understand that that would negatively impact rural communities. I understand that would negatively impact a lot of people who don't have ready-made access to all the courier services. But we are facing a situation where Canada Post, this is the time of year where Canada Post generates a lot of its revenue, and now they've generated nothing. So, other than through Purolator, which they also own, but that's not money that then gets shared with Canada Post, right? So it's an unfortunate setup that the people being negatively impacted, and obviously if you're in the union, you're going to be negatively impacted because you're not going to work, you're not making that money. But if you are trying to ship and you're dealing with higher shipping costs and it's eating into your profits as a retailer or an e-seller, this is just this is absolutely kneecap those businesses, and those business owners aren't going to be very happy. And for people who are trying to shop with these sellers, they're not going to be happy either. So it's ugly. And basically, the gist of part of it, and I mean, obviously, it comes down to money and benefits in the end. But Canada Post wants to hire part time workers for weekend shifts. They want to work on weekends, they want to expand the hours. And unions saying, hey, if you're going to bring in weekends, we want to work them. The problem being that with with the expired agreement, that would mean that those workers would get paid a premium wage. So I'm guessing that's time and a half or double time for working on weekends. It's right there that they can't work on a weekend without being paid extra money. And so they'd have to claw some of that back. But if you had them covering on weekends, you'd still need to hire part time workers then for other shifts. And they don't want this to become a gig setup. They don't want this to be a setup where there's a lot of part-time workers. And so it's at a standstill because they're not speaking the same language. They're not seeing the needs for this company going forward as being the same. And when I see people say things like, well, it's not meant to make a profit anyways, it's not a business. Okay, but it was making a profit, now it's not. And if it runs out of money, which they've talked about it running out of money in early 2025, the taxpayers have to bail everything out. And it's because it's a crown corporation, that's where all of a sudden the taxpayer is paying for it. So if taxpayers aren't paying for it because they have the money, that money's being frittered away. This strike's going to probably speed that process up. And who knows what the corporation looks like in 2025. As I said in the initial video on this, it just feels to me like this was a badly thought out strike by the union. And I know people are saying, oh, this is the busiest time. That's when there's the most pressure. But what if the company goes, oh, well, and they walk away from the table? The pressure is no longer on the corporation if they don't give a damn. And it just doesn't feel like they do. The corporation seems to have dug in and gone, we have to change this company. We have to change how it works. We have to change how people get paid and what the shifts look like and what the hours look like. And if you don't like it, all right, well, we'll just keep everybody out then until we get our way. That sure seems to be how things are going. And as I've always said with sports, the people with billions of dollars can always outweigh the people with millions of dollars. This is not billionaires fighting with millionaires. This is a corporation which has some money fighting against the workers who really don't. They can't afford to keep this strike going indefinitely, and it feels like it could go on indefinitely. So I decided this was a good video to start the wearing of the Monopoly um, jersey. So, which of course is from Geeky Jerseys. So just saying. But yeah, it just the story just it seems to have all ground to a halt, and now it's negatively impacting a lot of retailers online. It is negatively impacting people who are waiting on packages for Christmas. It is negatively impacting. There's a lot of stuff I've been reading about that's caught in the mail that I've thought, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Items that are not considered vital. So nobody's going to step across a picket line to pick that item up and make sure it gets delivered, but items that people really like. So, and really need. So, for instance, if you're waiting on, I was reading there's a family that was waiting on a part to fix the refrigerator. They've been waiting weeks to get it through a courier, and so they're having to basically turn their house upside down trying to make this work because they don't have the money for a brand new fridge. They don't have the money, to take it to some that kind of thing, right? So not everybody has a bunch of money right now, and this is where we're at. Now people are having to use the expensive couriers, and they are definitely more expensive than Canada Post, and it doesn't mean your product gets there any faster. And with millions of extra parcels being added to these couriers in Canada, it has caused them to have a lot of issues with delivery. But those are all parcels that are not being delivered by Canada Post, and we now sit just a couple of weeks away from Christmas. So yeah, this strike, if it was meant to force the company to move on any issues, from what I've seen, they really haven't. There's been just like minor movement here and there, but it doesn't look like they're speaking the same language. And when you have something submitted on Friday, and it's Monday morning, and the union's like, "Yeah, we're looking through it," there just doesn't seem to be any urgency. If there was urgency, they would have looked through it when they got it on Friday. I don't care how many pages it is. They would have gone through it on Friday. They would have poured over it, and then they would have had a response on Saturday. I know, working on Saturday is crazy, but something like this that's affecting 55,000 workers, there should be some sense of urgency, and it just doesn't feel like it's there. So hopefully this gets resolved, and if it doesn't, who knows? Maybe I'll be back in a couple weeks to talk about how this all plays out from here. But this could absolutely speed up Canada Post running out of money. This could speed up calls for uh, you know some kind of federal back to work legislation, which wouldn't help anybody either. So yeah, it's kind of a mess. There you go. But let me know your thoughts, and I know people will. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.